The icy wind nipped at Ava's cheeks as she stood at the bus stop, shifting her weight from one foot to the other to keep warm. The baby in her arms, little Leo, stirred beneath his blue blanket, his tiny fists peeking out. She adjusted his hat, her fingers trembling slightly. Whether it was the cold or the memories threatening to resurface, she wasn't sure. The early morning streets of Havenbrook were still waking up. The hum of traffic and the glow of headlights created a quiet symphony that contrasted with the storm brewing in Ava's chest. The past year had been a brutal journey. Single motherhood hadn't been part of her plan, but she was adapting. For Leo, she would do anything. She glanced up as the familiar roar of a sleek black luxury car approached. Her heart skipped a beat, and a chill, not from the cold, crept down her spine. She recognized the car immediately. The customized plate was unmistakable. The door opened, and out stepped Ethan Cole, the CEO of Cole Enterprises and the man who had once promised her the world. He looked as impossibly polished as ever, his dark suit hugging his tall frame, his short black hair styled to perfection. The same storm-grey eyes that used to soften when he looked at her now scanned the sidewalk with a detached indifference. But then his gaze landed on her. For a moment, time seemed to splinter. The traffic noise faded away. The wind paused. It was just the two of them, standing on opposite shores of a chasm they'd both created. His eyes flicked down to the bundle in her arms. Leo shifted, letting out a soft gurgle. Ethan's brows knit together in confusion, and then something else flashed in his eyes. Shock, maybe even panic. "Ava?" His voice was low, cautious, as though afraid speaking her name would shatter an illusion. Ava's throat tightened. She held Leo closer, her fingers curling protectively around him. "Ethan." She said his name like a closed door. He took a step closer, his polished shoes barely making a sound on the pavement. He stared at the baby, then back at Ava. "Is that your son?" She forced herself to meet his gaze, her brown eyes hardening. "Yes," she replied, her voice clipped. "My son." A muscle in Ethan's jaw twitched. His eyes searched her face for answers she wasn't willing to give. "I didn't know you had a baby." "You wouldn't," she said coldly. "You walked away a year ago, remember?" The accusation hung between them like frost, sharp and biting. Ethan's eyes clouded with a mixture of guilt and confusion. He took another step forward, his voice softening. "Ava, I didn't—" "You didn't what?" She cut him off, her voice shaking. "You didn't mean to disappear for a year, to leave me waiting, wondering if I even mattered to you after 5 years together." Ethan flinched. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. What could he possibly say? His reasons, whatever they were, felt hollow now. Ava's gaze dropped to the ground, her jaw tightening. She'd practiced this confrontation 100 times in her head, but reality was messier. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "It doesn't matter anymore. I've moved on. We've moved on." The bus approached, the brakes hissing as it pulled to a stop. She adjusted Leo's blanket and took a step toward the open door. "Ava, wait," Ethan said, his voice edged with desperation. "Are you married?" Her eyes flicked back to him, her expression inscrutable. "Yes." Ethan's face fell, his shoulders sagging slightly. He nodded, his jaw clenched. "I see." But something in his eyes didn't quite match his calm exterior. A suspicion, a flicker of doubt. He watched as she climbed the bus steps, the baby cradled tightly in her arms. The door closed, and the bus pulled away, leaving Ethan standing on the cold sidewalk. The icy wind cut through his coat, but he hardly felt it. His mind was a storm of questions. He replayed the image of the baby, dark curls peeking from beneath the hat, the curve of his small nose. Something gnawed at the edges of his mind. The baby's eyes. For a fleeting second he could have sworn they were the same storm grey as his own. Ethan Cole stood on the cold pavement long after the bus disappeared from view. His hands were clenched in his pockets, the wind whipping around him like a cruel whisper. The chill on his face was nothing compared to the icy realization sinking into his chest. Ava was married. She had a child, and she had moved on without him. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his thoughts. Why was this bothering him so much? He had made his choice a year ago. To leave, to focus on the relentless demands of his company, to bury himself in work and ambition. He had convinced himself it was the right decision, the necessary one, but now the image of Ava holding a baby with eyes that seemed hauntingly familiar, gnawed at his resolve. Storm-grey eyes. just like his. No, he muttered to himself, it's not possible. But the seed of doubt had already sprouted. He knew he wouldn't be able to shake it off. He needed answers. He turned abruptly and walked back to his car, sliding behind the wheel. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. For a long moment he just sat there, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man who stared back looked powerful, confident, in control, the very image he had worked so hard to maintain. But beneath that veneer a storm was brewing. He started the engine and drove off, his mind racing. He needed to find Ava. He needed to know the truth. Hours later, Ethan sat in his expansive office on the top floor of Cole Enterprises, the floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk, but he barely noticed. His focus was on the screen in front of him. He'd had his assistant, Liam, gather information on Ava's whereabouts over the past year. Every click of the mouse brought a new detail, a new reminder of the life he had chosen to leave behind. Ava had moved to a modest apartment in a quieter part of the city. She had taken on freelance design projects, juggling work and caring for her baby. The records were sparse, but one thing was clear. There was no sign of a husband, no marriage license, no shared addresses, no wedding photos. The statement she had made at the bus stop, that she was married, was a lie. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Why would she lie to him? And if she was lying about that, what else was she hiding? His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. His sister, Emily. He hesitated before picking up. Emily had always been the one person who saw through his walls, and right now he wasn't sure he was ready for her insight. "Hey," he said, his voice strained. "Ethan, are you okay?" Emily's voice was warm, concerned. "You sound off." He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. "I ran into Ava today." There was a pause. "Oh, she had a baby," he said, his voice low. "And she told me she's married." Another silence stretched between them. "Do you believe her?" He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. "I don't know." The baby's eyes, they looked like mine, Em. Emily's breath caught. "You think he might be yours?" "I don't know what to think." He ran a hand through his hair. "But I can't just let it go. I need to know the truth." "Then ask her," Emily said softly. "You deserve to know. And if he is your son, he deserves to know you." Her words struck a chord deep within him. He'd spent so long burying his feelings, convincing himself that walking away was the right thing to do. But maybe he had been wrong. Maybe he'd been running from something, someone far more important than he realized. "Thanks, Em," he said quietly. "I'll figure it out." "You always do," she replied. "Just be careful. You're not the only one who can get hurt." He ended the call and stared at his reflection in the window. The skyline blurred as his thoughts swirled. He needed to see Ava again. He needed answers, and this time he wouldn't let her push him away. The next morning, Ava was in her tiny kitchen, swaying slightly as she cradled Leo. The baby cooed, his dark lashes brushing his chubby cheeks. She smiled down at him, but her heart felt heavy. Running into Ethan had stirred up a whirlwind of emotions she thought she had buried. The hurt, the betrayal, the lingering love, all of it came rushing back, and the lie she had told him weighed on her like a stone. "I've moved on. We've moved on. I'm married." Why had she said that? Was it to protect herself? To shield Leo from the chaos that Ethan's return could bring? Or was it simply to hurt him, to make him feel the same rejection she had felt when he left? A knock at the door startled her. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hesitated, then walked over and peered through the peephole. Her breath caught. Ethan. Her fingers trembled on the doorknob. She considered not opening it, pretending she wasn't home. But she knew Ethan too well. He wouldn't leave until he got what he wanted. With a sigh, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. Ethan stood there, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked down to Leo, then back up to her. "We need to talk." Ava swallowed hard. "There's nothing to say." "I think there is." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in, his presence filling the small space. The scent of his cologne, clean, sharp, familiar, wrapped around her, making her chest ache. He turned to face her, his eyes softening as he looked at Leo. "What's his name?" "Leo." A small smile touched his lips. "Leo," he repeated, as if tasting the word. He looked at her, his eyes searching. Is he mine, Ava? Her breath hitched. Panic rose in her throat. Why does it matter now? Because it matters to me, he said, his voice raw. I need to know. She hugged Leo tighter, tears pricking her eyes. You left, Ethan. You made your choice. I made a mistake, he admitted, his voice breaking. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. And if he's my son, I want to be part of his life. Her defenses crumbled. The pain and anger she had held onto for so long fought with the hope she didn't want to feel. She looked into his eyes, searching for the truth. Finally, she whispered, Yes, he's yours. Ethan closed his eyes, his shoulders trembling. When he opened them, tears glistened in his grey depths. He reached out, his hand hovering near Leo's tiny fist. May I? He asked softly. Ava nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan touched Leo's hand and the baby's fingers curled around his thumb. A sob escaped him, and for the first time in a long time, Ava saw the man she had fallen in love with, the man behind the walls. I'm so sorry, he choked out. I should never have left. Ava's heart cracked wide open. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she saw a glimmer of hope. And maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. The room was heavy with emotion, the air thick enough to choke on. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he cradled Leo's tiny fingers in his own. Ava wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, trying to steady her breathing. The truth was finally out, but with it came a tidal wave of uncertainty. Leo's eyes blinked up at Ethan, and for a moment the world shrank. Everything else, the pain, the betrayal, the unspoken years, faded into a quiet hum. There was just this fragile connection, as delicate as a spider's web, yet unbreakable. Ethan broke the silence, his voice rough. Ava, I want to be in his life. In your life. He paused, his eyes pleading. I need to make this right. Ava's shoulders slumped. It's not that simple, Ethan. Why not? His voice sharpened with desperation. I know I screwed up. I know I left when you needed me, but I'm here now. Please let me try. She shook her head, frustration clouding her expression. You think you can just walk back into our lives and fix everything with a few words? Her voice quivered. I spent a year feeling abandoned, raising Leo alone, trying to figure out what I did to deserve that. I can't just forget that pain. Ethan's face twisted with regret. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting me? She laughed bitterly. From what, Ethan? From love? From a life we could have built together? He clenched his jaw, his eyes flickering with a storm of emotions. From myself, he admitted. From the mess I was becoming. She stared at him, disbelief etched in every line of her face. That's not your choice to make. Ava turned away, her arms tightening around Leo. She felt like she was drowning, waves of anger and sorrow crashing over her. Ethan had been her anchor once, but now he was just a weight pulling her back into the depths. A soft knock on the door startled them both. Ava froze. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He glanced at her, suspicion flickering across his face. Are you expecting someone? He asked. No, she said, her voice tense. Her heart hammered in her chest. She took a step toward the door, her mind racing. The knock came again, louder this time. Ava swallowed and opened the door a crack. A man stood there, his expression tight, his jaw clenched. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked past Ava to land on Ethan. He was impeccably dressed, his suit tailored to perfection, his blonde hair slicked back. He radiated an air of control, the kind that made Ava's stomach twist. Hello, Ava, he said smoothly, his voice dripping with false warmth. I was wondering when you'd finally answer. Ava's knuckles whitened on the edge of the door. What do you want, Victor? Victor's smile tightened. You know what I want. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. Who is this? Victor's gaze swept over Ethan with a hint of disdain. I'm the man who's been helping Ava stay afloat this past year. He glanced at Leo, a smirk curling his lips. You didn't think you could hide forever, did you, Ava? Ethan's body tensed, his hands curling into fists. What the hell is going on? Ava's voice trembled. Victor, please. Not now. Oh, it's too late for not now, Victor said, his smile turning into a sneer. You owe me, Ava, and I always collect. Ethan's eyes flashed with rage. He stepped between Ava and Victor, his voice low and dangerous. I don't know what you think you have over her, but it ends now. Victor's eyes gleamed with malice. You think you can swoop in and play the hero, Cole? You have no idea what she's done, What she owes. Ava's stomach dropped. The weight of the secret she'd been carrying for months threatened to crush her. She had made a deal with Victor when things got desperate, a deal she regretted every day. He had given her a loan when she needed it most, but the interest was more than just money. He wanted power, control, and he was tightening the noose. "I'm handling it, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please stay out of it." "No." Ethan turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You don't have to handle this alone." Victor laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "She made her choice, Cole. She can't walk away from this, and neither can you." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Try me." Victor's smile faded. "You have until the end of the week, Ava," he said, his voice a threat wrapped in silk, "or you'll regret it." He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps fading into the cold morning air. Ava closed the door with trembling hands. Her legs felt like they might give out. She leaned against the door, her eyes squeezed shut. Ethan reached for her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Ava," he whispered. "What's going on?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I borrowed money from him. I didn't have a choice. I had to take care of Leo." He closed his eyes, guilt crashing over him. "Why didn't you come to me?" She laughed bitterly. "You weren't there, Ethan. I didn't even know where you were." He exhaled sharply, pain etched into his features. "I'm here now. And we'll fix this. Together." She shook her head. "It's not that simple." "Then we'll make it simple." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes fierce. "I won't let him hurt you, or Leo." Her resolve cracked, the walls she had built around her heart crumbling. For the first time in a year, she let herself lean into him, the warmth of his touch chasing away the cold fear that had gripped her for so long. But even as she held on to him, doubt whispered in her mind. Could she really trust him again? Could they really untangle the mess they had created? Leo stirred in her arms, his tiny face peaceful. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, a silent promise that she would protect him no matter what. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked at Leo. "We'll figure this out," he said quietly. "I won't let you face this alone." Ava nodded, but the weight of Victor's threat lingered. The clock was ticking, and she knew they were running out of time. As Ethan wrapped his arms around her, she allowed herself a fragile hope. Maybe they could fix this. Maybe they could reclaim the life they had lost. But deep down, she knew the storm wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. Ava felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders as she stared out the window, watching the winter sun struggle to break through the grey clouds. Leo slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of the chaos threatening to unravel the fragile peace his mother had worked so hard to create. Ethan stood silently behind her, his gaze fixed on her back. The tension in the room was suffocating, a reminder of the storm that brewed just outside their fragile bubble. Victor's threat was a dark cloud, looming ever closer, and time was slipping through their fingers like sand. "We need to come up with a plan," Ethan said finally, his voice low and steady. Ava turned to face him, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and worry. "And what kind of plan do you have, Ethan? Victor isn't going to back off just because you tell him to. He holds all the power here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not all the power. I have resources, Ava. I can pay him off. We can make him go away." She shook her head, her fingers twisting together. "It's not just about money. Victor thrives on control. Even if you pay him, he'll find another way to hold it over us." He took a step closer, his storm-grey eyes filled with determination. "Then we'll find something to use against him. Everyone has weaknesses, Ava. We just need to find his." A spark of hope flickered in her chest, but it was quickly snuffed out by the cold grip of fear. "And if we can't, we will." His voice was resolute, his hands gently taking hers. "I promise you, we will." Ava searched his face, looking for the man she used to trust with her whole heart. He was still there beneath the layers of regret and guilt, and though her heart was guarded, a part of her wanted desperately to believe him. A soft cry came from the crib, and Ava moved to pick Leo up, holding him close to her chest. Ethan watched them, his eyes softening as he took in the sight of his son. The weight of everything they had lost and everything they stood to lose hung heavy in the air. "Let's go to my office," Ethan said quietly. "We can figure out our next steps there." "It's safer than here." Ava hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." The ride to Ethan's office was silent, the tension thick and palpable. Leo dozed in his car seat, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around him. Ava watched the city pass by in a blur, her thoughts spinning. Every turn of the tires brought them closer to a confrontation she wasn't sure they were ready for. When they arrived at the towering Coal Enterprises building, Ethan helped Ava out of the car, his hand lingering on her arm. She allowed herself to lean into his touch, just for a moment. It was a small comfort, a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone anymore. They stepped into the elevator, the mirrored walls reflecting their strained expressions. Ethan's jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on the floor numbers as they ascended. Ava took a shaky breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. The elevator doors slid open, and they stepped into the sleek, modern office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city. The buildings bathed in the cold light of winter. The space was immaculate, everything in its place, a stark contrast to the chaos of their current situation. Ethan set Leo's carrier down on the leather couch, adjusting the blanket around him. Ava took a seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ethan sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "We'll get through this," he murmured. "I swear it." Before Ava could respond, the door burst open. Liam, Ethan's assistant, rushed in, his face pale and panicked. "Mr. Cole, you need to see this." He handed Ethan a tablet, his hand shaking slightly. Ethan frowned and took the device, his eyes scanning the screen. The blood drained from his face. Ava's heart pounded as she leaned in to see what had rattled him. The screen displayed a news article, the headline glaring in bold letters. "Scandal at Coal Enterprises. CEO linked to shady loan shark." Below the headline was a photo of Ethan and Victor, taken at some high-profile event years ago. The article was full of half-truths and insinuations, painting Ethan as a man tangled in dangerous dealings. It was clear Victor had leaked the story, twisting the narrative to make it look like Ethan was complicit in his schemes. Ethan's hands trembled with barely contained rage. That bastard! Ava's mind raced. This was exactly what Victor wanted, to destroy their lives, to ruin any chance of a future together. Panic bubbled up inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Ethan," she whispered, "what do we do now?" He took a deep breath, his eyes hardening with resolve. "We fight back." Before she could ask how, the door swung open again. This time, Victor strolled in, his smile smug and predatory. "Nice office, Cole," he drawled, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I thought I'd drop by and congratulate you on your newfound fame." Ethan stood, his body a taut wire ready to snap. "You've gone too far, Victor." Victor's smile widened. "Oh, I don't think so. This is just the beginning." His gaze slid to Ava, cold and calculating. "You should have listened to me, Ava. Now you'll both pay the price." Ava's hands curled into fists. "You don't control us." Victor laughed. "Don't I? The world thinks your golden boy here is in bed with me. His company will crumble, his reputation will be ruined, and you'll have nowhere left to run." Ethan's voice was like ice. "We'll expose you. The truth will come out." Victor's smile faltered, just for a second. It was enough. Ethan seized the moment. "You're scared," he said softly. "You know if we dig deep enough, we'll find something that can bury you." Victor's jaw clenched. "You won't get the chance." Suddenly the door burst open yet again, this time revealing two uniformed police officers. Victor's eyes widened in shock. "What is this?" he hissed. One of the officers stepped forward. "Victor Harrison, you're under arrest for extortion, blackmail, and fraud." Victor's face twisted in rage. "You set me up." Ethan's eyes were cold steel. "You did that to yourself." As the officers cuffed Victor and led him away, Ava's knees went weak. Ethan caught her, his arms strong and steady around her. "It's over," he whispered. "He can't hurt you anymore." Tears filled her eyes, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and hope. She looked up at him, her voice shaking. "We still have so much to fix." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with love and regret. "We'll fix it. Together." Ava took a deep breath, feeling the weight finally lift off her shoulders. Leo stirred in his carrier, and she smiled, brushing a finger over his soft cheek. For the first time in a long time, the path ahead didn't seem so dark.